Hi guys, this is John from WaltonsInc.com and this is Gamebird Gourmet. I recently had the opportunity to go do some hunting in South Dakota and we brought back a bunch of pheasants. We decided what better to make with a bunch of pheasants than pheasant snack sticks. So the first thing we're going to do is freeze our pheasant breast. We want this nice and hard when it goes through this grinder. Any upland bird, any bird period really, you want to make sure is super cold when you're grinding it. These we basically had frozen, just cut into chunks large enough to fit down the throat of our grinder and began grinding. Now, you want to grind this twice. The first time you want to grind it through a larger plate, something like a 3/8 or even a 3/16 will work. But your second grind, you want to go through a 1/16 plate. We want this really fine when we're going to mix, it'll make things much easier. Now, pheasant is a fairly lean bird, so we do need to get some pork fat. We're adding 25% pork fat here, but if you don't have access to straight pork fat, you can do a 50-50 mix of pheasant and untrimmed pork butts. It does have to be untrimmed pork butts though. You need that fat content. If you're doing a 50-50 mix, just grind everything together so both the pheasant and the pork will go through a 3/8 plate and then a 1/16. But if you're adding just pork fat, just grind all your pheasants through your larger plate and then grind your fat along with the pheasant through the smaller plate. Now I've got zip ties to make sure that I'm marrying one plate with one knife. This is going to ensure that everything wears at the same rate and it's going to extend the life of your plates and knives. And as always, I've fully white oiled both the plate and the knife before I've begun grinding. Now pheasant has a really nice light taste, so really any seasoning will work with it. But we're going to go with our Willy snack stick seasoning. We're also going to add Sure-Gel that's going to help bind everything together and increase our final yield a little bit. And we're also going to add encapsulated citric acid, but we're not going to add that until the last 60 seconds of the mixing process. To make everything easier, I'm going to hook up my Weston 44-pound meat mixer to my Weston 22 Butcher Series grinder and let it do all the mixing for me. So the first thing we're going to do is add the pheasant, then we're going to add the seasoning, then the water which we've already mixed the Sure-Cure into, then we'll add the Sure-Gel and begin mixing. We're going to let it go until we start getting some protein extraction. Remember, we've got an additional 60 seconds at the end of this, so we don't need to achieve full protein extraction during this phase, just want to get it pretty sticky. So once we've got the level of protein extraction we want, we're going to go ahead and add the encapsulated citric acid and the cheese. I've had this cheese in the freezer just to make sure that it retains its form as best as possible. So just let it go ahead and mix for another minute. Then you want to check just to make sure that you have good protein extraction. Good way to do that is to grab a handful of it, pull it apart. If it begins to stretch and move with you, then you know you've got protein extraction. If it breaks, you need to keep mixing. Also, you can simply just grab a handful of it, hold your hand upside down. If it sticks to your palm and in between your fingers, you're probably there. So we're ready to stuff. I've already put some white oil on the gasket around the piston, and that'll just let it move through the canister a lot easier. We're going to choose the largest stuffing tube that our casing will fit over. In this case, we're using a 19mm Smoke Collagen, which in my opinion is the best option. You can use a 21mm, it makes it a little bit thicker, but I wouldn't go smaller than 19mm. Recently we've seen a bunch of people trying to use 17 and 16mm smoke casings, but that puts a lot of stress on the grinder. To extend the life of your stuffer, stick with the 19mm. It gives us small enough so it still looks like a good snack stick, but it is a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to stuff. As always, clamp down your stuffer to the table. That'll prevent it from rocking back and forth. This is especially important if you are processing by yourself. We want to stuff until we can just faintly see the swirl pattern running down the snack stick. If you don't see that swirl pattern at all, you're probably overstuffing. If it's incredibly obvious, you're probably understuffing. Now this is a good time to talk about wrinkled versus smooth. If you want a casing that has a little bit of wrinkle to it, just go slightly understuffed. And if you're wanting a smooth casing, go ahead and stuff it a little bit more. Just know that you're running the risk of blowouts while stuffing and the casing snapping during the smoking process, which can create a huge mess. Now, since this was pheasant, I wanted to go ahead and put a light smoke on it. So I started my smoker at 110 degrees with all the dampers wide open and ran a 10-minute drying phase. Then I increased that to 130 degrees, but I still left all the dampers wide open, did not add any smoke or humidity, and ran that for an additional 30 minutes. So we had 40 minutes of drying there. I then upped the temperature to 160 degrees and I smoked it for an hour. So I added smoke and humidity at this stage. I then went ahead and ran another drying phase just for 10 minutes at 145 degrees with no smoke. I finished up by running a cook cycle at 180 degrees with as much humidity as I could get into my smoker, and I did that until the internal temperature was 165 degrees. Since it's a pheasant, it's a fowl, I decided to go up to what I would have done with chicken. You don't necessarily have to do this, but I do recommend it. Once I was done cooking, I went ahead and put them in an ice bath for 20 minutes. Halfway through, I did change out the water just to make sure they cooled all the way down. Finished results are amazing. The encapsulated citric acid with the willies, the pheasant, and the cheddar cheese works together incredibly well. It's a great light taste. I could eat a ridiculous number of these and still want more. Now, if you're a pheasant hunter, but you're not big into sausage making and you've seen all the equipment that I've used today to make these, you don't necessarily need all of it. You can do it with just a grinder. You want to grind twice just like we did, but then you can use the stuffing attachment for your grinder to stuff these into snack stick casings. Problem is you'll probably have to use 21 millimeter, but it still gives you a fine snack stick looking casing. It's just a little bit larger than most people might be used to. And since you won't have a mixer, you'll have to mix by hand. Just keep mixing. Remember to keep everything cold through the entire process. I had my grinder head, my auger, and both my plates and knives in the freezer before I started grinding. It's especially important for wild game, but it's even more important when we're using bird. As always, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and visit waltonsinc.com and meatjuststicks.com to find everything but the meat. Thanks for watching. I'm John with waltonsinc.com, and we'll see you guys next time.